welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today for another installment of Conversations at the Culver. I am Katie Porter, Executive Director of Inlandia Institute. We are a 501c3 literary nonprofit based in inland Southern California. And today we have some special guests with us, the comedians, the brothers Tod and Lee Goldberg, who also dabbled in crime fiction. And we have Susan Straight, who everybody here should know, novelist, hometown hero, and they are going to be in conversation about their new books. So, but before we begin, Inlandia does want to respectfully recognize and acknowledge the current and present caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. And we express our gratitude to them for allowing us to live and work on their ancestral homelands. So just a little bit about our presenters. I imagine you know mostly who they are, but Lee Goldberg, you want to wave, Lee?
I'm the younger one. How dare
you. Is a two-time Edgar Award and two-time Shamus Award nominee, and the #1 New York Times best-selling author of more than 30 novels, including Malibu Burning, and you have a new one that is out there too, right?
Yeah, Calico just came out. Actually, it's coming out Tuesday. This will be the first time it's been available.
That's how they do it on Instagram. They like move it around.
But they're usually not as dressed as you are right now while they do it.
What?
He's not my brother. I don't know.
These are writers. Writers always wear clothes. Anyway.
He's not been on Instagram lately.
And with him is his brother Tod Goldberg, who is the author of more than a dozen books, including Gangsterland, a finalist for the Hammett Prize, Gangster Nation, and The Low Desert, Gangster Stories, named a Southwest Book of the Year and a finalist for several literary prizes. And he directs UCR's low residency MFA program out in the desert. And then, of course, we have Susan Straight, whose memoir In the Country of Women was a national bestseller and a Best Book of the Year by NPR and Code Switch, and long listed for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence, as well as being a finalist for the Clara Johnson Prize for Women's Literature. Her latest novel is Mecca. So welcome, Lee, Tod, and Susan.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it.
Would you all like waters?
Yeah, I've got one right here. Of course, I have to bend down and
Right.
show you all my butt while I get it.
Does it sound okay in the back there? Can you all hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on a beautiful Sunday when everybody's celebrating the weekend of Dia de los Muertos and there's music and everything going on downtown. It's really nice to see you. I was pretty excited when I was asked to do this, but before I start, I actually want to give not just a Riverside shout out, but a SoCal shout out to Inlandia. So we all do events, and Tod and Lee both know this. Inlandia is who's supervising events here, but also at the Riverside Public Library, in high schools, everywhere. So Katie and Janine and everyone else from Inlandia, you guys have hosted my last 3 events, and I'm very, very grateful. So round of applause for Inlandia, please. Yeah, it's a lot of work to do these, and
Just a footnote, they're hosting our Thanksgiving dinner at my house later this month. They really got all around the Southland.
All right.
We're all invited.
Right.
Yeah.
They do the yams with the marshmallows.
Well,
It's a nice touch.
I'm glad to be in conversation about both of these books. The funny thing is, I had to borrow one of Tod's because whenever I finish one of Tod's books, I always have to give it away to somebody in my family because I talk about it so much. The darkness. I still have Lee's book, but my ex-husband has had his eye on that one, and he's like, "Are you giving me that one next?" And I'm like, "Well, let me do the event first." In order to sort of stick to we're talking about noir. I thought I would start by saying that both of you, Goldbergs, have written novels here that actually test the boundaries of what people call noir.
Mhm.
You know, people have hillbilly noir now, they have country noir, they have urban noir. There is a sort of a strange desert noir thing.
Right.
We write June noir.
Well, no, just hold on now. Todd, your main character, Sal Cupertine, turned Rabbi David Cohen, is willing to do the darkest crimes for his family,
Mhm.
but he believes in the Torah
Right.
now.
Correct.
And Lee, your female deputy, is hilariously jaded and cynical at the start, and yet the darkness of your plot actually brings her to life and gives her some redemption. So do you guys want to start there with the noir thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think noir is a term that has, in effect, lost its original meaning over the years. I will say, though, incidentally, this morning I woke up, and not that I check Amazon every morning right when I wake up,
Of course he does.
but it just so happens that today the #1 noir novel in America is Tod Goldberg's Gangsters Don't Die. So, yeah, it's a special day for all of you.
So it has an Amazon category.
Yes, of noir, yeah. And so the kind of noir that I write, I think sort of gets lumped into what they call, sort of sun-bleached noir, which is instead of things happening in the dark of the night, it happens in the brightness of the day. And I think that makes it all the more insidious, because when you do crimes without hiding out, I think it generates sort of the sense of, I really don't care if you see me doing terrible things. And the way I look at noir has always been, bad people doing bad things to worse people. And for me, with a character so my main character is a Chicago hitman named Sal Cupertine, who in the first Gangsterland book killed undercover FBI agents and had to go on the lam, and he ends up in Las Vegas hiding out as a rabbi, the Rabbi David Cohen, at a synagogue in Las Vegas, though he is not Jewish, and he absolutely is not a rabbi.
Let me interrupt 1 second.
Yes.
Say, that may sound like a situation comedy setup, and what my brother does so brilliantly is he takes that bizarre concept of a hitman hiding out as a rabbi in Las Vegas and makes it gritty and real and makes you believe it. You're not laughing at it, you're laughing along with it, which is, I just think it's absolutely remarkable. It's like taking my favorite Martian and making it dark and believable.
Thank you.
Really admirable. It's astonishing feat that he pulls
But
off.
I mean, and this is the same thing that Lee pulls off in his new book right now, where you should not believe in a time travel, plot in a noir novel, but there it is. But the point that I wanted to make is that noir is also about sort of the transactional nature of people to pretend to be other things to get what they want, grifters and con men and everything. And so for me, writing about a guy pretending to be a rabbi for so long that he becomes a rabbi, by the time I wrote this last book, he is a rabbi. And I recognized, as I sat down to write this book, now I actually have to write about a rabbi who murders people versus a guy who murders people pretending to be a rabbi. And it was an entirely different experience for me. Lee?
I don't know how I follow up a rabbi who kills people. I don't think of my book as noir. I mean, noir is really about people driven and undone by their darkest impulses. And in my book, my heroine has already been undone by her darkest impulses and is paying the price for it. She's a former LAPD rising star who had sex with a younger cop under her command and is exiled for it. She's ruined for it. And has got the only badge anyone will pin on her is out in Barstow. She might as well be out of law enforcement. And she thinks her career is over. She's trying to essentially redeem herself, but doesn't know how, and is still driven by her drug of choice is sex. And
Lee's.
And my mind, yes. I look mild-mannered, but don't be fooled. I'm so tired of the cliches of noir and crime fiction. I'm tired of the middle-aged homicide detective haunted by a dark past, the serial killer who murdered his family, or the time he spent in Nam or whatever, and he's a drug addict or an alcohol addict, he's divorced, he's brilliant, but his superiors don't acknowledge it, even though he solved 97 murders. And they're always chasing serial killers, and I'm tired of that. So every time I had an opportunity to confront and subvert a cliche or a trope, I did it. But at the same time, I'm aware that I have to honor and service the tropes at the same time, or you're going to hate the book. And with this particular book, and I hated myself when I was doing it, but I decided to take on 3 genres. I decided to take on the contemporary police procedural, the period Western, and the time travel trope, and to undermine them all and yet have them all work together as one coherent novel. Not as a medley, but as a single song with a single voice, and that was the challenge. So the way to bridge that is with characters you can invest in and with a consistent voice.
I remember when he called me to say, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing this book that's been in my mind for 20 years or something." I was driving for some reason between Los Angeles and the desert, and he was telling me this as we're on the phone. I'm like, and I said, "Well, Lee, that sounds absolutely bananas." And he's like, "Yes, I can't wait to do it."
But there's we're talking about art and literature here, but let's be honest, there's also a business point of view.
Right.
This is going to sound cocky and egotistical, and forgive me for it. I am known for writing police procedurals. I have a very large following of readers who expect police procedurals from me. So I was aware that if I was going to try to tell a Western story or a time travel story, there damn well better be a police procedural in there, or my readers will stand up and riot and burn my house down. So no publisher would publish me unless I was delivering the goods that they expect from me and that my 3 or 4 fans expect from me.
Well, this is a perfect segue to talking about landscape. The other main characters, besides all of you guys' amazing main characters and secondary characters, is really landscape. And landscape is, to me, one of my favorite things to talk about in fiction. And I don't know how many of you are writers out there. Is anybody writers? Yes? Okay. Well, I thought this would be a good writerly question too. And using the landscape in such vivid detail, I always love to hear people read even a short passage, don't you? So anyway, Lee, I picked one out for you.
Oh, great. I'm like, no, and she's like, pick one out for you. Which one do you want me to read?
It's right there.
Okay.
The first paragraph that begins with B?
The first two. So Lee's book, those of us from the IE, you got Yermo, Calico, Barstow, Baker. You've got Eddie's.
Eddie World.
Yes.
Yeah. So you want me to
Eddie
read
World.
all the way from here to here?
You do what you want to do.
Oh my God. I hope you guys had a lot of caffeine and sugar today. Beth printed out photos of the mystery man and gave them to the watch commander to distribute to the deputy so they could ask around about him. In the meantime, she decided to drive out to the Calico ghost town, which was once a private tourist trap, but was now a San Bernardino County regional park, giving it the sheen of historical significance. If the mystery man fancied himself a miner, she figured the park rangers might have seen him in the mountains around the hundreds of abandoned silver mines and caves. She drove out to Yermo, then north across the dry lake bed up to the graded but sloping ridge at the base of the jagged mountain. Well, that'd be suicide. Beth knew that wasn't hyperbole. Most of the mine shafts were horizontal rather than vertical, but many had collapsed into the tunnels below. There were also some open pits, and every few months a sheriff's department rescue team was called to recover the body of some idiot hiker who thought the caves would be fun to explore, despite all the warning signs erected everywhere, and got himself killed.
All right.
Now that I read that, I would have done some editing.
All right. So, wait, that's you.
Oh, still me. Sorry. You can have the book
that's
back.
me.
That's all right.
So before I ask Todd this one,
When you were writing about Yermo and Eddie World and Calico, did you drive out there? Did you spend? Because I know you spent a lot of time on research, but when you were driving out there, like it's vast, and yet you described it so well.
Well, what's great is the reason I wrote this book is happened to be between book contracts when the lockdown happened. So I figured if I was finally going to write the book that's been haunting me for 20 years, now was the time to do it, when I didn't have other obligations and I was locked in my house. So most of the book I researched and wrote from my desk. But the great thing about that location is you can go out to it without seeing another living soul. It's a place even COVID-19 is afraid to roam. So I was able to go out there and spend a lot of time feeling the place. And frankly, it was so nice to get out of the house and be in a vast open space without a mask on and not being worried about being killed by something I can't see. It was great. And it was such a contrast to the world I live in. And even though I'd driven through here that area so many times, I never actually stopped and looked at it in detail. And I drove all the back roads and I wasn't afraid of getting lost. It's wide open space. It was fascinating. And I had with me on my laptop a lot of the research. So I was able to compare photographs and information I had on my laptop to the real world. And, I got out of my car and I walked a bit. And I'm a firm believer. I wrote 5 international thrillers with, what's that lady's name?
Janet Ivanovich.
Janet Ivanovich, yes. I'm hoping she'll break out into a career of her own. But I wrote 5 books with her, and they were all international thrillers. And I went to every place I wrote about. If I was writing about Macau, I went to Macau.
It's also a tax deduction.
Exactly. In fact, there was one time Janet called me up and said, our next novel starts in Hawaii. I said, why is that? Just because my ass is there right now. So, and I don't go because I want to impress people with my geographic or historical knowledge of a place. I'm a firm believer in boots on the ground and finding that observational detail, that taste, that smell, that texture, the one line or observation I can make in a scene that will make it real to you so you believe all the rest of the bullshit I make up. To ground it in a reality. And I don't think you can get that from guidebooks or looking at Anthony Bourdain or Rick Steves episodes, though I do that too.
Well, that's exactly what I want to. There's a push and pull because those of us who are writers are like, well, yeah, I don't want to go shoot up heroin, but I want to write about being a heroin addict. This is what I tell my students. There is your imagination. All of the things that Lee just said, still you have to add your imagination, right? For those of you who are writers. But I think it is really great as a native of this place. There, Peggy Sue's Diner and like all the places that you see when you're on the way to the desert. But all of that comes to life, as you said, because there's that perfect detail. Todd,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is your 4th book. This is the final
Yes,
in this quartet
correct.
about Vegas. And the Vegas that you read about in here is much more multifaceted than you might think. That Rabbi David Cohen lives in Summerlin. And Todd and I, we went to the Las Vegas Book Festival last October, almost exactly a year ago. And Todd has a huge fan, Katie Buttinger, who is the head director of operations for the Vegas Golden Knights. So we got to go to a hockey game in Vegas, and I was just stunned by how homey Vegas is for so many people. And that's what you write about. You write about Las Vegas as home. I can't find the page, but there's a section in here where he's describing Summerlin.
Oh boy.
I know. You find it while I'm talking.
All right.
So what Todd has done with this quartet is to meld the Chicago gangster world of Sal Cupertine and his family, decades past.
Are you thinking of the part when he's in the hospital?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's exact. I thought I had it, but my eyes, I can't look at them and then look down.
Yes.
It's too hard. So there is a way that Todd is writing about Las Vegas, and there are great books about Vegas. I actually love Voutran, Dragonfish. That's a great book that Todd and I love. But this Vegas is broken down into the real money. The real money is retirees who move to Vegas and end up having to be in nursing homes. The real money is in a synagogue that also functions as a hidden burial outlet for mob bodies. You guys are like, what? No. Todd's version of Las Vegas, as with Lee's desert, it's very specific. Can you find it, Todd?
Are you talking about the strip was off limits, same with Fremont Street, local casinos?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Also because to get ready, I watched Ocean's 13 last night, and then they were all saying, the Sands used to be here. I was thinking about what Las Vegas is in fiction, but what Las Vegas is in Sal Cupertine's world is this absolutely broken down place where every neighborhood means something. Could you read that part?
So how many of you are familiar with Summerlin? Anyone? So if you're not familiar, how many of you are familiar with Irvine? Okay, imagine Irvine dropped in the middle of the desert, but they put in traffic circles. Like, that's the distinguishing characteristic of Summerlin, is they were like, so we're gonna have a lot of...
You see what he just did? He encapsulated the entire neighborhood with one line, the traffic circles.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. That's all you need to establish it's Irvine in the desert with traffic circles. That, to me, is writing.
Yes. I'm very skilled at this. But the problem with installing traffic circles there is that the majority of the people who live there don't know what they are. They've moved to Las Vegas because they want the freedom to be assholes. And what you don't want to be is an asshole on a traffic circle. You'll just spin there for days. It's like going around the Arc de Triomphe. Threw a little Arc de Triomphe in there. That was nice. So this little bit that I'm going to read here, our main character, Sal Cupertine, at the end of the previous book, got hit in the face. And so he's had plastic surgery so that he looks more Jewish. And at the end of the last book, he gets hit in the face and he goes to the hospital and he has to have profound plastic surgery to fix the injuries to his face. And he wakes up at the hospital after the plastic surgery. They hand him the mirror and he looks like what he looked like before the plastic surgery, which is a problem because that's the face of a person wanted by the law. So he's been in the hospital when this book opens for 3 months, battling a variety of infections and himself, and me trying to figure out how to get him out of the hospital. And so on this day, he's trying to figure out, where he is in the world now. He built a life for himself in Las Vegas as the Rabbi David Cohen, oversaw an empire of Jews who trusted him, because it turned out the longer he pretended to be a rabbi, the better at being a rabbi he became, until the difference was meaningless. He was a rabbi as much as he was a hitman, and yet he was trapped. Sal had access to cash, weapons, and cars, but couldn't leave the city limits of Las Vegas. Not again, anyway. Surveillance was everywhere. And I should note, this is the beginning of 2002, so post 9/11 in Las Vegas, where, as you may recall, they locked down that city looking for evidence of the 9/11 bombers who had spent a bunch of time in Las Vegas. The Strip was off limits. Same with Fremont Street. Locals' casinos were out of the question. Palace Station was like a fucking FBI outpost now, with the cop bar Poor Decisions across the street. You might recall that.
And that is maybe part of why I wanted to.
Yes. Banks were a no-go. Sports arenas, outlet stores, fuck a mall. That was like trying to sneak into Tehran. The whole fucking world was covered in cameras looking for bad guys. Technology putting faces together with crimes. Las Vegas about to be the absolute worst city for him to be in, with his old face and the Patriot Act in full effect. Even now, looking out the window at the tree-shaded suburban streets of Summerlin, Sal counted dozens of cameras. The Noah's Bagels in the parking lot of the hospital campus was fortified like a cartel safe house. Never mind all the artfully designed cell phone towers, gussied up to look like palm trees and cacti, all of which were nothing more than tools of government surveillance. All those years, Sal Cupertine had achieved the American dream. He'd gotten away with murder. Not one body, not two, not 20, maybe 100. Could be more. He didn't keep count. Whatever the number, Charles fucking Manson would be creeped out by him. That was the truth. Because Manson hadn't even pulled a trigger. And here Sal was. A guy who'd seen brains on walls and eyes on the floor and hearts through people's back. And just kept moving, kept living. Wasn't carving swastikas into his forehead. Had himself a family, a reasonably good job, his full mental faculties. Right up until the time he got to Las Vegas. And found himself incarcerated in the suburb of Summerlin, doing shit that was likely putting him on a watch list with God. And now, he had to worry about getting caught by a camera? Not a cop? Not an FBI agent? Not even another button man? No. His undoing would be a machine. which is why the safest place at the moment was, in fact, the hospital. So, poor decisions. Oh, thanks, Lee. I'll tell the joke. Lee and I and our dear friend Fief Sutton, who's a writer and TV producer, were in Green Bay, Wisconsin at a conference called the Writers Police Academy, which is this awesome 4-day conference they hold at a law enforcement training facility where they let you shoot guns and drive cars and storm buildings and put out fires. And Lee and I got to do like the shoot, don't shoot training, and it turns out Lee and I could not, in fact, be cops.
Oh, speak for yourself. I aced it. That was great.
Lee was plugging moms with
You
strollers.
were massacred the moment you walked in the room.
Yeah, I was dead, man.
I was like Hondo Harrelson in SWAT.
You were not. And one day we had left our training feeling pretty great about ourselves as future ATF agents. And we walked by a bar in the middle of Green Bay called Poor Decisions. And I was like, that is the greatest name of a bar that has ever existed. I claim it. It's mine. And then Lee was like, no, this is public property. You can't claim public property. And so the three of us decided...
He said the same thing.
Yeah.
I'll get on faster than you because I write for television.
So the three of us decided, all right, our job now is to get Poor Decisions into all of our next work. And so I put Poor Decisions first in the low desert. Where did you put it?
Right there.
Right there.
Calico.
Wasn't it something else first?
Yeah, I had it in one of my Eve Ronin novels.
And Thief put it in an episode like Chesapeake Bay or something.
Chesapeake Bay or Boston Legal. I can't remember what he put it in. But it was such a great name for a bar. We just had to do it. And it's so funny because so many of the reviews for Calico mention Beth McDade, who mourns her career at Poor Decisions, a bar in Barstow. It's just a perfect name.
It's a perfect name.
I'm laughing at the two of them because they're got their fictionalized Poor Decisions, but you guys know where I hang out
Yeah.
twice a week. I hang out at the Elks Lodge where all those guys actually go through it. So, yeah,
Susan lives the life I write about.
my friend, who shall remain unnamed, the U.S. Marshal, who I'm playing darts with, and he's like, hold on, how many rounds do you have? How many weapons? Okay, go get him. All right, what are we doing? And I'm like, I was going to throw a dart, but now I'm scared. All right, let's move away from Poor Decisions. In
Well done.
so many.
I challenge you, Susan Straight, to get Poor Decisions into your next book.
I'm not going to do that. Here's what. Again, some of you are writers, all of us are readers. For these two books, they were. I love that we started out talking about noir because let's think about the traditional noir. James M. Cain, there's always a twist, right? And the twist is often about betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
But for both of these books, I loved, I couldn't put it down where Calico turned into something completely different. And I think that's one thing I want to say to us as both readers and writers, right? Is that when you're reading, don't you love that moment where you're like, wait a minute, this is not going where I expected. Like, this is taking a completely different turn. So Lee's book, Calico, takes this completely different turn into this surreal landscape of history. So I'm going to ask you to go first. But then Todd's, Sal Cupertine, it takes this turn that I also did not expect. And that is because of loyalty. And so can you go first, Lee? How did you feel? Like you're writing, were you surprised by this
Well,
turn?
I think before you can break the rules, you have to know the rules and be proficient at following the rules in order to break them. As I hinted at earlier when we spoke, I believe if I'm going to write a crime novel, readers pick up a crime novel expecting a crime novel. We have a saying, and I should mention in the biography of me, but I spent a lot of time in television. I've written and produced thousands of hours of TV, Diagnosis Murder, Sequest, Rewatch, tons of stuff. And
He's twice written a dolphin.
Yes.
We'll get to that later.
You haven't lived until you've written for a dolphin. I wrote for The New Adventures of Flipper, and I also wrote for Sequest, which had a talking dolphin. And I can tell you, when I was in college learning to write, it never dawned on me I'd be writing dialogue for a freaking dolphin. There's no preparation for that. When I remember sitting in my office, what has my career come to? I'm writing dialogue for a mammal, for a talking dolphin.
It was Flipper, man.
No, this was not Flipper. This was Darwin. Flipper didn't talk; he just emoted. But
Flipper just solved crimes.
we're getting away from noir. So going back, I did not set out to write a book that was making jarring turns into different genres. In order for the book to work, as I said before, it had to be one consistent tale. It couldn't feel segmented. Oh, now we're in the police procedural, now we're in the Western, now we're in the fantasy. It had to feel like this was the only way to tell the story. And the way you do that, I believe, is by not writing a genre mashup. You do it by writing one coherent story that may have these elements in it, but is a genre unto itself, that is consistent in the characters you invest in and the challenges they face and the overall theme and voice of the piece. So it feels like a coherent whole. As I said earlier.
Debbie, the
So
cop.
you have Beth McDade, who's
Beth
a deputy in Barstow. You've got
But what I'm going to say is, there's this moment that's great where she's been researching the death of this person everyone thinks is a transient.
don't give away the book. They haven't read it
I'm
yet.
not.
Okay.
But there's a moment halfway through where I'm invested in her, even though, as you said, she had given up on herself. She's like, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to figure out what happened to this person.
The
No one
story
cares
is
about
all about two things:
Yeah.
personal redemption and sacrificing yourself for the future of somebody else,
Exactly.
which can also mean the past of somebody else. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not.
And it's
And so you have two
riveting.
characters who are separated by 135 years and yet share the same emotional connection and actually the same corpse on the ground, but that's another story. But I wanted it, if I didn't get you invested in the character,
Right.
if I didn't get you to believe the emotions and who these people were, there's no way the story was going to work. If you found yourself saying, oh, now he's shifting genres, or now he's dealing with this trope or that trope, then I have failed. If you become aware that you're reading a genre mashup and not just a thriller that hopefully is constantly surprising you, then I blew it.
See, that's the perfect answer, because again, those of us who are writers, you can't think, what do my readers want, or what about this, or will I sell it? You literally have to focus on the characters,
Well,
which is what you do.
I'm going to disagree with part of that. I do
Well,
think
yeah.
about what do my readers want. And my readers expect certain things from me. My readers expect a very strong, truly clued mystery, fairly clued
Right.
mystery. They expect a twist ending.
But they didn't expect Calico Man.
No. And I've had some readers who've been pissed off about that. Well, not pissed off, initially surprised and then go along for the ride. I've only had one reviewer who said he was profoundly disappointed.
We
But-
can send you a link to that.
Apparently,
It's in Publishers
we
Weekly.
heard that today. Well, okay, that's perfect, because it's also a great segue. Todd, you've got 4 novels about Sal Cupertine, and I have read them all. We've spent lots of time thinking about them and talking about them. But this, when you're writing the finale of a quartet that you've invested all of these years and all this emotion in, so the Low Desert had great stories set around the Salton Sea. In this book, Sal Cupertine sees the future, but again, it's about loyalty and betrayal. That's what really leads your plot. So how do you feel about that? Did you feel this moment where you were like really sad at what was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, so the title is Gangsters Don't Die, which indicates someone's going to die, because not everyone in here is a gangster. But then you also have to start asking yourself, well, is our main character a gangster or is he a rabbi? Dun, 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 dun. You find that on about page 384. He literally has a moment where he announces, I am a... This book was really emotional for me, to be perfectly honest with you. I've been writing this character, Sal Cupertine, for 15 years. I started with a short story called Mitzvah that appeared in an anthology called Las Vegas Noir, where I was asked to write about the neighborhood in Las Vegas where I had lived, and I had lived in Summerlin, because I am part of the problem. I currently live in a gated community in the desert on a golf course and a man-made lake, because what I'm trying to do is destroy the planet.
I also live in a gated community around a lake.
Yes.
Man-made lake.
We are part of the problem in the desert. But so I wrote this short story that came out in 2008 about Sal Cupertine's last day on the job as the Rabbi David Cohen. I finished the story, I looked at it, and I went, oh my God, there's so much more for me to do here. Because the first line of the short story is that Rabbi David Cohen wasn't Jewish, had ceased over time to be a problem. And when I wrote that line, like when I actually said those words, I thought, oh, Todd, you've done it, man. You've done it now, because now you're going to have to figure out what has happened over time and why it has ceased to be a problem. So I set up this problem for myself, a good problem to have. And I'm gonna get to the actual answer in just a sec. It involves this part of it. The truth is that I was not well versed enough in my own faith and my own culture to write a character who was pretending to be a rabbi. I didn't know enough. And so I spent from 2009 until 2011, 2 full years, reading the Torah, the Talmud, the Midrash, books on Jewish eschatology, the Nuremberg trials. I read everything. I have all these shelves in my office of research, not knowing what I was going to need for these books. But I knew that by the time I was done, because I knew it was going to be at least a trilogy, I knew by the time I got to the end that I had to be able to write convincingly about a rabbi. And what happened for me is that the character goes from being purely a hitman into being a person who has a profound notion of hope. And hope is not something you see in a lot of crime fiction, but it's something that I wanted to do. It's something that I wanted to convey, that you don't have to be mired in the life that has been set forward for you, that there is hope for change, there's hope for something better. And to show a character who is influenced by faith and by culture becoming something else, becoming a better version of himself, that change, which happens fully in this book, was an extraordinarily emotional experience for me. I walked out into my living room where my lovely wife, Wendy, was watching HGTV, and I'm sobbing as the Property Brothers are showing the crown molding off. And she's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know. I've been writing these books for 15 years. I feel like..." And she's like, let's get you something to eat or drink. I am just feeling very deeply. But what I was hoping, and this goes back to what Lee was talking about, and this is something that my brother has taught me as a writer, is it's also about servicing what the readers want by that point. And I had been writing these books for so long that I had a pretty pure understanding of what the readers really needed from this main character, from Sal Cupertine, where they wanted to see him go. And I wanted to see him go in the same place, but I also wanted him to be fallible and to make mistakes along the way. And that was a really challenging aspect for me as a writer.
Yeah, for both books, I'll just say before we open it up for audience Q&A, for both books, you do believe that these characters are searching for their own redemption. And for Sal Cupertine, when you read this last one, you get just as much of a sense of how damaged he was as a child by his family. I mean, his dad was in the Chicago mob, and there's this whole generational thing. And then you see this man sitting across from someone and comforting them with words from the Talmud. And you think that this is the most tender moment you can imagine, and what this has been set up. And for Lee's character, Beth, this is someone who literally doesn't believe in anything in the beginning and believes in all kinds of stuff by the end. I think it's a good place to end. I loved both of these books.
I should say, we've been talking about literature and literary motivations and character. The bottom line for both Todd and I is we want to entertain the hell out of you. These books are fun. They're escapist entertainment. And while they may have these levels that Susan's talking about, at the end of the day, we just want you to have a good time and
So he's
escape
like,
your
Susan,
troubles.
stop overreading?
No. That's all there. But I don't want you to be thinking these are literary novels. They're popular fiction. They're fun and they're funny, especially Todd's book, very funny. And we hope you'll just be transported by them and have a great time reading them.
Don't make poor decisions.
All right, Katie's got the microphone, and if anybody would like to ask questions, that would be great.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. My name is David Duran. How did you make the bridge? He's an Italian character, am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
How did you make the bridge believability in him convincing the congregation that he had enough background to be?
Well, it's a great question. The first and most important thing is that what we all want from a religious leader is to be told how it all ends, right? A hitman knows how it ends. He's turned the lights out before. So there's that aspect, but it's also the notion that he realizes that people want comfort. And if you tell, this is in the first book, and it's also in the original short story, if you tell them something is from the Talmud and it's been passed down from religious leaders for thousands of years, they'll believe it because they haven't read the book. And so in the first book, he also finds if he doesn't have an answer that's any good, he'll just quote Neil Young or Bruce Springsteen, but he'll change the words around a little bit so that it seems like it's from the Talmud. So he'll say, ma'am, I understand how you feel, but you must ask yourself, is a dream a lie if it doesn't come true? Or is it in fact, as the Talmud says, something worse, which is a line from The River by Bruce Springsteen. But if you say it with enough importance in your voice, it's like, my God, Maimonides really was onto something with that. So people believe what they want to believe, never more so than in the world that we're living in today. And so his ability to give people what they want and then eventually begin to actually give people wise counsel for things. People want to be heard, people want empathy, and people want to feel like what they're receiving comes from someplace beyond them. And so they believe in the person in the role. Just like we believe in our doctors or our presidents or our congressmen, you want to believe that they're telling you the thing that's going to help you.
More hands? Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Thank you. Tod, you said something that struck me, and I want to ask you to explain a little bit. You said after you wrote the short story and you realized that there was a character there that you saw it was going to map out as a trilogy, which ended up being a quartet. And so that's my question about your process. How did you know that it wasn't just one big book, but that you were going to break it up into 3, or in this case, 4 books?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the thing I tell my students all the time, like, just don't think of it as a trilogy, because you have to have one really good book, or you're not going to be able to write the next 2. I oftentimes will be, I'll have a fantasy student, and they'll say, I view this as a 9-book series that I'll take 75 years to write, and I was like, let's try to get 120 pages for the thesis. The honest answer is, once I realized what the book was going to be about, I saw it completely. I saw the full story of this man. And I realized, that's 1,000 pages, what I want to do. Because I wanted to show him becoming a rabbi, taking power and leading his own congregation, and then trying to find his family. And those are 3 huge plot points that I knew were going to take entire books to create. And I wanted to show that journey, that evolution of a man who was purely a device of violence into a man who becomes a device of empathy. And I knew that was going to take a long time. But the interesting thing, and I think Lee has probably experienced this too, because we've both written a lot of series fiction, is the key is having a main character who has a problem so profound that one book can't solve that problem. And if it does, then you have to continue to place new obstacles in front of him. And so I saw completely what his issue would be. And let me just say, I'll tell you also briefly how this all came to me. So I had to write this short story, right? And I had no ideas. And in Palm Springs, there's a very old Native American cemetery quite near the airport. And I've lived in Palm Springs most of my life, and I'd never seen a person walk out of that cemetery before. And I was stopped at a red light, and I saw a person walk out of that cemetery. And I was like, am I the only person that can see this? Is that a ghost? What is that? And then I was like, I had the notion of, if I wanted to get away with murder, I'd kill someone and bury him in that cemetery. And then I was like, wait, there's something there. Who could profit from burying bodies in old cemeteries? And by the time the red light turned green, and in my mind this must have taken hours, but it was about 45 seconds, I had the Rabbi David Cohen burying bodies in cemeteries for the mob. It was right there. And it was just seeing a person walk out of a place. And I'm sure that that's an experience you've had too. Like one thing strikes it.
I don't ever set out to write a series. I set out to write one good book. And if you're going to write one good book, it better have all kinds of conflict, not only internal conflict within the character, but with other characters, and then an obstacle that's impossible to achieve. You want enough conflicts to drive that story and generate sparks, be them dramatic or humorous, in every scene. And that's certainly true in series television. If a series is going to run 110 episodes, it has to be driven by a core conflict that can be explored from so many different angles once a week, 22 episodes a season. I wrote a book called Lost Hills, I think it's out there today, the first book in the Eve Ronin series, but that wasn't how I wrote it. I wrote a single cop story. If you told me that I'd end up writing almost 3,000 pages about that character, I wouldn't have believed it. You know, I'm on book 7 with that character. But those conflicts, I created enough conflicts that I could probably write 40 more books with her without a problem. If you told me I have to write 2 books this year with Eve Ronin, I would say no problem.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting too about this question is I was thinking again of that people always think there's this huge divide between what we're talking about as commercial fiction or limited series, which is everyone's obsession right now. Like people will watch limited series with 10 episodes more than they'll watch a standalone movie these days. It's true. And I was thinking, well, Elizabeth Strout, you know, has written 6 novels with these particular characters. Yeah. Todd and I have both been discussing this week. We're both in conversations with studios about with FX, which is funny for his book and for my last book. And I have been asked to write 2 more books about my main characters because it would work for the series, which is I already had the 2 books. But like you said, it's because I love this character so much as well as his best friend. It was easy. I'm already done with the second book. The fascinating thing about what all of us are saying, for those of you who are writers, you have to deeply, deeply know and love your characters to be able to come to these kind of conclusions. So,
you have to be ready when you write I wrote a standalone thriller a few years ago called True Fiction that was not meant to ever have any sequels, but it did so incredibly well that they demanded 2 more books. It's like, I can't think of any. It's not meant to be a series. 48 hours later, it's like, okay, I can do it. And
you saw a man walk out of a cemetery.
Calico hasn't even officially come out yet. It comes out Tuesday. And already the publisher's saying, we want 2 more. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I have any ideas. Now, if you call me an hour from now, by the time I reach home, maybe I will. But
and we're Californians, so we find our ideas driving.
Yes, that's true. Very much true.
That's great.
First of all, I just wanted to say I apologize to you all for coming in late. I missed a treat, but I didn't because now I'm fascinated. I'm not a writer, I'm a consumer, and I can't wait to buy all of your books.
Oh, even better. Yeah.
You won't have to wait long. They're right outside the door.
Thank you.
There's a hand way in the back in the dark. Don't trip.
Careful.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about. I'm a writer, and I wanted to ask you about that splitting the genre. Where do you have romance in your novels as well as the? Are you talking about degree in terms of splitting, genre splitting?
Well, I think in my book, it's probably the genre is crime and Western and speculative fiction. But there is romance. There's a grand romance that spans generations and centuries in my book. But if you're asking, is there a traditional romantic genre story? Not intentionally, I don't think so. Though one of the reviewers of my book said he thinks he's only mashing up 3 genres, but he's mashing 4. So.
And in my Gangsterland books, one of the large emotional through line is the fact that all that Sal Cupertine is doing is trying to get back to his wife. And all his wife is trying to do is get back to him, and they're both hidden off in a version of witness protection. But instead of having hot sex, instead there's a bunch of murder, because I don't know how to write that stuff.
He's also never experienced it.
It's a good point.
It's a really good question though, because that's the thing is if you're writing from the depth of the characters, it'll all come naturally. Like what happens to them will come naturally.
Let me just tell you a genre story, because it's how my career started. I was a student at UCLA, 18 years old, and I had a journalism professor who wrote those big, bulky conspiracy thrillers like Robert Ludlum used to write. And his publisher came to him and asked him if he'd write a men's action-adventure novel. and he didn't know what that is. And it was basically the male equivalent of Harlequin romance. They had titles like The Executioner, The Destroyer, The Drooler, The Immolator, The Defecator. You know, they were in finer 7-Elevens and Safeways and Ralphs. They always had a guy with a six-pack abs and a big gun and with huge breasts and explosions on the cover. And he said, I'm not hungry enough, desperate enough, or stupid enough to write one of those. But I know somebody who is. And he recommended me. I was not even 19. I was between 18 and 19 years old. And I decided, okay, obviously I'm going to take this opportunity. And I read all these men's action adventure novels, but I was going to be Susan Strait and Tod Goldberg. I was going to not do a genre novel like that. I was going to bring literary sensibilities to it. And my character was a vigilante. His father was killed by a gang, so he picks up a gun and starts killing people, and he becomes a celebrated vigilante. But because he's killing everyone,
Faulkner of vigilante.
Yeah. But because he's killing people all the time, when it comes time to make love to his girlfriend, he can't get it up. All he sees are the people he killed. And I sent the manuscript into my editor, and he said, "Are you out of your mind? This is a men's action adventure novel. Not only is he having sex, he's having incredible sex." And I was trying to do the Larry McMurtry of men's action adventure. So I rewrote it with the most outrageous sex scenes you can imagine that defied gravity, anatomy, good taste. I mean,
the laws of Utah.
Yeah, he glanced at a woman, she'd collapse in multiple orgasms. It was insane. And I sent this book into my editor, and he calls me a few days later and he says, "Lee, I've read the new scenes." I knew what the next line was going to be. "And you're fired, and we're going to make your professor write these books." That's not what he said. What he said was, "Not only are these scenes hot, they're real." And I thought, oh God, if this is what real sex is like, I'm the worst lover on the planet.
Now here's the important thing. So Lee's writing this book. He's 19 years old when it comes out. Lee is 9 years older than me. I have just learned to read, so I was profoundly dyslexic as a child. And so I would go to every...
Keep in mind, I wrote 4 of these books,
right.
So it went on for a few years.
Every B. Dalton in America I went into, or every B. Dalton in Walnut Creek in Northern California where we lived, and I would pull out his book and see if anyone would notice that I was reading it and ask me, how do you know the famous author? And I said, it's my brother. But it was in a B. Dalton in the Sun Valley Mall where I read my first sex scene. Here's what you don't want from your first sex scene that you read. To have it be written by your brother who's not had sex. I'm not going to go into detail because you can... Lee inexplicably republished these books in the last 10 years. There is a scene of 2 people having sex using Rocky Road ice cream, presumably as a lubricant. And I was, even at 10, I was like, that ain't gonna work.
I don't know why I thought that was an answer to your question about genre and romance, but that came to my mind.
God, it's horrifying.
Only here at Inlandia could you learn this much. This has been a wonderful event. I don't know. Are we out of time? I think.
Well,
we might. It's up to you guys. One
Yeah.
more is fine.
We're all
Last
done.
question. No more sex, please.
Okay, number
Please,
We're
no more
British.
sex.
Okay.
I work here.
Todd,
Yes, sir.
this is directed at you. I saw the Breed Street Shoal. Are you familiar with that?
No.
In East LA. It was
Mhm.
East LA at one time was really a Jewish
Yeah.
area. You're familiar with that?
Yes.
Anyway, so years ago I started a novel and I finally finished it called Boyle Heights,
Mm-hmm.
about this Jewish cop and an undocumented businessman, Mexican, who becomes a successful businessman. And it's a crime story.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm Chicano. I'm Mexican American, and I'm kind of out of the water. Put it that way, regarding the things that I wrote. And when you mentioned your research, I thought if there's some way of guiding me in terms, it's already written, and I think I did at least kind of a credible job. But for accuracy and things like that, what do you recommend for? Again, I had a Jewish character
Right.
and a Mexican American Catholic. So
Well, I mean, if he's a rabbi, you really got to know what they know. And I say this because it's important. I'm a big believer that we are influenced by what we read. That a lot of us gain empathy by reading, primarily as a young person. But when you're talking about someone who's deeply invested in their religion, you can understand their logic by understanding the things that they have read. And when I'm writing a character, I'm not trying to show what they look like. I'm not trying to show what they wear. I'm trying to show how they think, what their logic is. And so my best advice to you is that if you're not familiar writing those Jewish characters, you don't necessarily need to go read the Talmud. You could go read a bunch of Philip Roth. You could read Amy Bender. You could read Karen Bender. You could read Tod Goldberg. Don't read Lee Goldberg. He has enough money. You could go and meet actual Jewish people. You could go to a Hillel, like the Hillel here on campus, and say, I'm working on a novel. What was Jewish life like in the 1950s in Boyle Heights? And they will find someone to help you to do that.
Or you can just ask them, what does it mean to you to be a Jew?
Yeah.
I mean, what I do in every book I write, is Kelsey here in the audience today? She didn't come. Oh, no, she's way in the back. What I do when I write a book is I seek out experts. You mentioned earlier you don't have to be an LSD addict to write about LSD, or a heroin addict, rather. But I'll find a heroin addict.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to them. What does it feel like when you shoot up? What does it feel like when you're not able to? I will go out and talk to people who live that life or have expertise in that field, so that I can, if I can't get the facts, I can get the voice or the feel. I mean, Kelsey will have to answer if I manage to evoke what it's like to be a sheriff's deputy in Barstow. But I spoke to her and so many other people just so I could absorb a life I was not familiar with. I'm familiar with life, but not life in Barstow and being a sheriff's deputy. So I always, for every book I do, I seek out experts. And if you look at the end of and I say experts, just people who've lived it. If I'm writing about someone who runs a donut shop, I'll go to a donut shop and say, can I talk to you for a minute about making donuts and how you got your start and what is it?
We've done a lot of donut shop research over the years.
But so when I say experts, just people who have a life experience that you don't,
Yeah.
talk to them.
Yeah.
And then it will imbue your writing with an authenticity. The most important thing about being a writer is being human, which I think you've satisfied. But
this goes back to the thing I mentioned earlier about the Writers Police Academy. One of the most important things that I learned there was not, about how to shoot a gun, but it's how cops walk. Like literally how they walk with that belt on. That belt is 25 pounds. And so they move a certain way, and they move their clothes a certain way to get the gun and do this and do that. And I was talking to this guy, Matt, who had gone undercover, and he got picked out as being an undercover agent immediately because he walked like a fucking cop. Like always like moving his hips like this and keeping his hands ready to pull out his gun, and was made almost immediately. But it's that little kind of detail that you need just by talking to real people about what their life was like then.
I think it's great advice, and it's a good place to end, because I think the most important thing I always end up saying is writers have to be good listeners. That's how, when you listen to the rhythms of how people talk or how they sing or how they tell jokes, and like you said, how does someone walk? How does someone comb their hair? Do they use Tres Flores, or do they use monkey brains pomade? What do they use on their hair? All that stuff. That's what makes you into a writer. Well, thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you all so much.
And Todd and I will both be out here signing our books and answering any questions you didn't feel brave enough to ask.
And ladies and gentlemen, Susan Straight, by the way.
Yes.
One of the great writers in America, not just the Inland Empire. I wouldn't have my career without Susan Straight, and this guy too. So, Susan, thank you so much. You're awesome.
My kid's called Todd Family, so that might scare him. But, they don't know you yet, but now that the Rocky Road stuff, I don't know.
Thank you all.